All right, welcome everyone to this meeting of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter of SABR. I am Bruce McClure, the chapter chair, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner Waterman chapter of SABR in Vermont, Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. Now, we have a really special presentation for you tonight, so let's get right into it. What happens when a minor league team, the heart and soul of a Rust Belt town in Western New York, is shut down by the billionaires who run Major League Baseball? Batavia, New York, between Rochester and Buffalo, hosted its first professional baseball game in 1897. Despite decades of deindustrialization and evaporating middle-class jobs, the Batavia Muckdogs endured. When Major League Baseball shut them down in 2020, along with 41 other minor league teams, the town fought back, reviving the Muckdogs as a summer league team composed of college players. With a vibrant, unforgettable cast of characters, from a librarian and her best friend whose relationship deepens with every crepuscular hour they spend together in the bleachers, to the former hockey brawler-turned team owner who greets regulars while working the concession stand, to an iconoclastic writer with a contagious love for his struggling hometown, tonight's book exposes the beating heart of a small-town America, friends and neighbors coming together as the crack of the bat echoes in the summer twilight. SABR member Will Bardenwerper is a graduate of Princeton University, where he majored in English. His book, Homestand, Small Town Baseball and the Fight for the Soul of America, was published by Doubleday on March 11th of this year and is now available. In his free time, Will enjoys ice hockey, golf, skiing, and rooting for the Pittsburgh Steelers, New York Mets, and Washington Capitals. Will lives outside of Pittsburgh with his wife, Marcy, their son, Bates, and daughter, Shay. Will Bardenwerper, welcome to Northern New England, good sir. How are you this evening?
Good. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us tonight. As I had explained to Bruce, I think in our emails, I have a lot of connections in that part of the country. My parents and one sister and her family live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. My other sister lives in Shelburne, Vermont, near Burlington, Vermont. So I spend quite a bit of time journeying around the New England region. So yeah, thanks for having me. And I thought maybe what would make the most sense is just to speak about the book for maybe 20 or so minutes, 25 minutes, and then just open it up to any questions that you may have. And if anything jumps out at you as I'm speaking, don't hesitate. I see there's a chat box here. You can type something in there, and I'll do the best I can to address it.
Yeah, if you have a question while we're moving along for Will, just go down to the bottom of the screen and hit the react button, and then click raise your hand, and we'll get you in line to ask questions. Go get them, Will.
Okay, so I think maybe back up to the origin or the genesis of the story, because there's kind of an interesting history there as well. I was living in Denver, Colorado in this would have been the fall of 2019, when the rumors of Major League Baseball's contraction of the minor leagues began to circulate. I knew enough about baseball. I'd played it through 2 years of college. I'd always been a fan. And I also kind of knew enough, I think, about small town America, having been doing quite a bit of reporting on other stories over that time period and in preceding years, to kind of just have an intuitive sense that this wasn't a great development for the towns that were going to be impacted by this decision. At the time, the rumors were suggesting that there was going to be one final year, that summer of 2020, and then after that was when this was going to supposedly happen. And so I thought that a pretty interesting story would be to embed in one of the communities that was affected by this and kind of tell the story of the last summer of baseball. And I ended up gravitating towards the Appalachian League, which was a low minor league played in Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina, and West Virginia. And I thought, this league, I think at the time it was the oldest, continuously running league. Some of these towns had teams for over 100 years, and it would be kind of cool to be there for the last summer. And so I put together a book proposal, sent it to a number of publishers. Fortunately, a handful of them were interested, one of which Doubleday and I don't even remember the exact status of our contract, but we came close enough to completing this contract that I was considering moving from Denver to, I think it was Asheville, North Carolina at the time, which was a cool town. It's centrally located. I figured it would be a great sort of base of operations to spend the summer, and then not a bad place to continue living because it was just a nice town. Anyway, as I think we all remember, that winter, only a few months after all of this, is when COVID began to really emerge in earnest. And I became increasingly anxious about what was going to happen this summer as it began to look like there might not be any baseball. And in fact, as we all know, that is what happened. It was the first season in the history of minor league baseball that was canceled in its entirety. And with that cancellation went my book, because the editor said, listen, this was going to be a summer of you telling the story of this final season. There is no final season. So as much as we like that idea, we don't really see what you can do now. Fortunately, I was able to salvage all of the research and the reporting that I had done in the form of a Harper's Magazine article that I wrote, which kind of just told the story of what this Appalachian League had meant to these communities, what had been lost. Obviously, I wasn't able to sit in the bleachers and recreate it or capture that because there was no season. But I was able to, I think, at least capture some of the themes of what made baseball special in these places and what was being lost. So how did that lead to this book? That article generated a lot of positive feedback. I got a lot of responses from all over the country. One of which was from a gentleman by the name of Bill Kaufman, who figures prominently in this new book, Homestand, that just came out. And he said, "I loved your article. It really resonated with me. Everything you wrote about being the case in these Appalachian League towns reminded me so much of Batavia and the Muckdogs and what we've lost, because their team, as well as most of the New York Penn League, was also extinguished in that same contraction, as were 41 other teams across the country." And he said, why don't you come up here to Batavia? I'd love to buy you a beer and we could just talk baseball. It's only about 4 hours from where I lived. I had subsequently moved to Pittsburgh. So I said, sure, I'd love to come up there. I did, and he introduced me to a number of his friends and fellow Muckdog fans, and we just got to talking, and they told me all about what baseball had meant to them. And it just so happened that in the place of the professional minor league Muckdog team that had been eliminated, they had stood up a collegiate woodbat team of the same name, which had just completed its first season at the time I met Bill. And so I thought to myself, maybe the story here is sort of the death and the rebirth of baseball in this community. And I can actually come and watch the games because there is baseball, unlike the season that got canceled. And I can meet all of these colorful and just really wonderful, as I got to know them, people who formed the support of the Muckdogs. And so I put together a new proposal to the editor, and I said, how about this for a story? And he really liked the idea. And so that's kind of what gave rise to this book. I spent the year, pretty much most of 2022, because I started going up in the winter to get to know as many people as I could before the baseball season even began. And then through that entire summer, and then kept in touch with them. I mean, I stay in touch with a number of them to this day, with the objective being that I'm going to try to, as best I can, capture sort of the magic of small town baseball, what makes it so special, and why it's something that we should be fighting to preserve and not cut in. I guess just to back up a little bit, maybe I don't know how familiar everyone is with the decision to do this contraction, and there's a lot of sort of explanations that have been put forth as to why it happened. I don't think there's universal agreement on it, but as best I can tell, there were a few ingredients or a few elements to it. I mean, one is the fact that for each team that was cut, the major league parent saved roughly $700, give or take $1,000 a season for each team that was eliminated. So that's, to put it in context, that's one major league minimum salary about, and now we have players who are earning close to that in maybe 3 games. That if some of the superstars today are earning over $200,000 a game, so you figure in three or 4 games they're going to make as much as it would have taken to keep these teams going for a year. So the money was I think there. It's just a question of how these major league parents choose to spend it. I think the argument that they would put forth, at least some of them, and again, not all teams were in agreement. I mean, ultimately they all agreed to do this, but I think some were more enthusiastic than others. Was that the existing minor league farm system was an antiquated system. It wasn't necessary to have 160 teams scattered across the country with, thousands of players and hundreds of scouts playing, hundreds of games a summer in order to efficiently identify, the very few guys who are going to go on to make it to the major leagues. It would be cheaper and just as effective to send them down to a complex in Arizona or Florida, run them through some sort of, NFL combine, technological assessments, use these advanced analytics to judge them that way. I think that there's some validity maybe to that argument. There's plenty of baseball people and talent evaluators who would not agree with it, but it's certainly a reasonable argument, and there's other arguments against it. But I think what that ignores is kind of the bigger question of, I guess, two questions is, does baseball really owe anything to these communities that have supported these organizations for over 100 years? And is it in the long-term, best interest of the sport to be cutting its presence in so many places in an era where the sport, arguably was already struggling to some extent with popularity and developing a new generation of fans and having geographic diversity. And so, that's kind of a separate question. So those were kind of the underlying elements, I think, to this decision and to this debate, to the extent that there is a debate. So I went up there, and I don't know. I would imagine that this audience is fairly familiar, at least with in general, with minor league baseball. But what I really, and I don't want to say discovered, because I kind of expected this as well, but I think what a lot of more casual fans and just sort of big city residents who may not have spent as much time going to games in these kinds of places, what really stood out to me and what I tried to capture in the book as best I could was kind of what does make it distinct and unique and special, and I think very, very different from the experience that you have if you go to a Citi Field or a Yankee Stadium or a major professional sporting event, really, of any kind. In that the affordability of it is pretty obvious, but it's $99 for a season ticket. $99 won't get you in the door of some playoff games with major league teams, and that will get you in for an entire summer here. And as a result, one of the things that you see that I think is unique and special is the fact that it's oftentimes the same people who are going there a lot. It's not like a once or twice a summer thing. It's really a part of the daily rhythm of life in this community. In part, also just because logistically it's easier. The ballpark is right in a neighborhood. You can walk out your front, and this is what most people do. They'll walk out the front door and they'll walk there. And so as a result of that, you have different generations coming together with regularity. You'll have a grandparent. I write about a couple who are in their 80s, their son who's in his 50s, and then the next generation, down to little toddlers and kids who run the bases after the fifth inning of every game and play catch, along the warning track, alongside the right field line. So there's something kind of neat about that. There's not a lot of parts of our contemporary American society where you see everyone from 5-year-olds to 80-year-olds coming together, 2 or 3 times a week and enjoying each other's company. I think in the book I talk about it. It really was more of kind of a community picnic or a family reunion atmosphere than it was like a major sporting event. It was the process of writing the book was certainly a challenge. When the initial proposal, when I put it together, I had, I guess at the time he would have been like a 3 or 4-year-old boy. After that, it just so happened that my wife got pregnant and gave birth to my daughter Shay about, I think, what would it have been? March 31st is when she was born. So about 2 months before opening day of this summer. So, I was essentially leaving behind at the Bates would have been 5 by the time that season started, and then she would have been 2 months old with my wife. And so what I did was I essentially commuted back and forth to Batavia that summer. Tried to get home at least, for a day or two each week to kind of help out as best I could, but spent most of it up there. So it was, it wasn't an easy process, and I'm very grateful to my wife for enabling me to do it. Fortunately, her family lived nearby, and they were a huge help when it came to making that happen. And I spent that year basically just gathering information, getting to know as many people as I could, doing the research and the reporting, and just gathering the material necessary to write a book. And then I spent the year after that putting that all together and actually writing the book. So it ended up being close to a 2-year process, kind of evenly divided between gathering material one summer and then writing it the following year. And then I think, for anyone who has already read the book, it will come as no surprise that I really do spend, I think, as much or actually more time in the bleachers kind of telling the stories of the fans and the community as I do on the field, telling the story of the players and the coaches. And that was kind of by design. That the baseball season was a useful sort of tool to give the story kind of a narrative arc, and I do the best I can to capture the drama of the Muckdogs as they compete for the championship. And there was some real drama over the course of the year. They had a wonderful season, a really charismatic manager, and some fun players. But I think what I was really trying to even more what was even more important to me was capturing what is it about this entire experience that is meaningful and important to the people who live there. And I did that through the lives and the experiences of the people I got to know in the bleachers. So for each given game, I might spend 3 innings on the field, and then the other 6 innings spending time with the people I was getting to know in the stands. Luckily, there was a YouTube broadcast of each game that I could go back and watch and use to kind of fill in any gaps that I may have missed in the course, of having discussions in the grandstands. And that way I could kind of still tell the story of the games themselves as accurately as possible. Hang on one second. I'm just looking to see. Okay, yeah, I saw the chat there.
I do have a question.
Yep, sure. You want me? Okay, you want me to take a break and
yeah, let's go to Jeff. He's had his hand up for a few minutes. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you, Bruce. And hey, Will, just finishing your book. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
I have 2 questions for you. You were talking about why the contraction was happening in minor leagues. Wasn't one of the reasons is that they wanted to give the minor leaguers a little more pay because they were getting such low pay, and this is the reason why they contracted, so that they can give the current minor leaguers, I guess the higher minor leaguers, more money?
Yeah, I mean that absolutely is one of the explanations, and they did. I mean, it's not a lot more in the big picture. I guess it's a lot more though if you went from 15,000 to 25,000, but it's not a lot more when you think that's like what Ohtani's going to make in
exactly.
one pitch, or whatever the case may be. So I thought that was a little bit of it wasn't the most convincing argument in my mind because
I agree.
The money is there, and it would have been there to continue paying everyone more, and again, and it also yes, so the players who are fortunate enough to continue having a place to play might be a little bit better off, but it's at the expense of tons of guys having no chance at all. And because now the draft's been cut from 40 rounds to 20 rounds, so you're looking at basically half as many people being able to even come into the system. So, but yes, I mean, I guess if there is a good part to it from the minor league standpoint, it is that the remaining people are going to get a little bit more money, and the facilities will probably be a little bit better.
Yeah, I don't buy the excuse, but I understand that's what they.
Neither do I.
Well, and it also, if you back up, and you may remember this as well, it was only a few years before when the minor leagues or when the major leagues pressured Congress to pass the Save America's Pastime Act, which and what that basically did was it exempted them from a lot of minimum wage sorts of labor laws. And the reason for that, and they actually sort of strong-armed the president, Pat O'Connor of the minor leagues, into endorsing it, kind of against his best, against his instincts. And the reason for that was, so that we can continue to preserve baseball in 160 places, because if we have to pay them more, we're going to have to contract. Well, what happened? They strong arm minor league baseball into supporting it. It passes, and they still get rid of teams in 40 cities. So, they don't have a track record of being the most, honest broker when it comes to some of these things.
Absolutely. My other question has to, while you were in Batavia, how is the food at the Eli Fish Brewing Company?
Oh, it's good. I'm actually I'm headed up there. When is it? In a week or two to do a book event at Eli Fish. So it's good enough that I chose to do one of my events there. So it's pretty good. The beer and the food is not bad.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hey, Will, the questions are coming fast and furious. You want to take questions, or you want to keep going?
I'll finish up. I only had about 3 more things I wanted to touch on, and they may even address some of the questions. They may not.
All right, so we'll hold questions. They can keep their hands up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it'll be probably no more than 5 minutes, and then we can do all the questions. So as far as themes go, and again, I don't know who's read the book or who hasn't. I won't give anything away, but I think the big one, and there's not necessarily even a right or wrong answer to this, but I just kind of asked the question of, yes, baseball is a business, and I get that, and we're a free country, we're a capitalist society, so they are entitled to do what they want with their money. I don't, there's nothing, illegal about that. The question that I asked, though, or I guess what bothered me a little bit was what I saw as a degree of hypocrisy, or a disconnect, at least you can say, between an organization, in this case, Major League Baseball, which likes to sort of wrap itself in the mantle of sort of Norman Rockwell, Americana, Field of Dreams. We're not just a business. We transcend business. We're America's pastime. We're something unique and special. And we occupy sort of this exalted place on the American landscape, and marketing yourself as such. But then you're making decisions that are, behind closed doors, that are just sort of ruthlessly, McKinsey sort of consulting. We're going to save every last, penny to maximize, the profits for the owners. I kind of just felt like you can't have it both ways. And the Field of Dreams game, I mentioned this in the book, it kind of served as a microcosm of this, in that it launched this game that they play now in Iowa, where the major league teams, converge on the Field of Dreams, and it's a ratings hit. It's a lot of fun to watch. But when you step back, the people who actually go to that game are often, or the stands are populated by a lot of very wealthy people from New York and Los Angeles and big cities that fly there to go to the game. The tickets are, generally out of reach and unaffordable to the people who actually live in the communities. I think they do try to earmark a certain number for people that live, within this, not too far from the stadium. But a lot of those end up on the secondary market. So, if you look at who's actually going, it's not generally people who live nearby. And at the same time, they actually cut 2 minor league teams from Iowa not too far away. So you say, okay, well, we have this wonderful sort of, pageant of baseball once a summer, but the other, however many nights a summer that there was actual baseball that the people who live there could actually go to has been completely eliminated. So I thought that just kind of highlighted this disconnect. And then the last thing I guess I would say, as far as, and I just neglected to mention it earlier, as far as what makes these games so special, is just the relationships that develop. And, I think it's no mystery that we're living in very sort of politically fragmented times, and a lot of people are at each other's throats, for any number of sort of political reasons. And this was kind of the one place where people could go to escape that, or, kind of put that to the side and just get to know each other as people. And I thought that was very healthy. And I have a few instances in the book of people that I talk about where, you have, for example, these two women that would commute regularly from Buffalo to go to games, who, and I never asked anyone what their political, allegiance was, but I could usually sort of connect the dots just through knowing them and make I think, surmise what they were likely. And so I think, it would be safe to say that these two ladies were rather liberal. And then there was a security guard at the stadium who, looked like he was sort of right out of MAGA, Trump central casting, a Iraq war veteran, wonderful guy, one of the nicest guys in the world. But these are two groups who probably would not cross paths in many other places. And if they did, who knows, if they'd be getting along with each other. But they, because of the Muckdogs, and seeing each other so often, grew to become really close friends. He would embrace them when they arrived and hug, they'd hug, and he'd ask them about their families. They'd ask him about his family. And so you had this really just nice sort of convergence of different groups who would probably ordinarily not have the opportunity to do that. And so again, it just comes back to, like, these are the kinds of sort of civic assets that we should be, taking care of and preserving and not reducing in number. So anyway, I will leave it there, and look forward to any questions I see. I don't know if they're on the chat or if people have their hands
We've got
raised.
some hands up in the room right now. Let's
Okay.
go to Tom Watson, who told me a little bit about his question earlier. I think you're going to like it, Will. Tom, go
Okay.
ahead.
Yes, Will, thank you for sharing your time with us. I don't really have a question as much as a couple observations. The first one I shared with Bruce before you came on, and this is an example of the small world in which we live. But as it turns out, I read your book last week. It was given to me by a friend. By the way, I live in Portsmouth. It was given to me by a friend who rents a home from your father. Your father apparently told him you had just written and published this book. My friend knows I love baseball, so he went out and bought it for me. I read it last week, and then I saw that you were going to be on this. So it's
Oh, that's great. I'll have to tell my father. That's fantastic.
it's great. So so I have read the book just last week, and a couple observations on it. I really thought your description of these communities was spot on. About a dozen years ago, I did a baseball trip through upstate Western New York. I saw games in Batavia when it was still New York Penn League. I saw the college team play in Elmira. I also saw games in Geneva and Syracuse. And but for rainouts, I would have seen the Auburn and Cooperstown and Troy, New York teams play as well. But that was the first time I had been in that area for probably about 30 years. Last time was some point in the early late 80s or something. And I was really surprised at how the communities had hollowed out. And I thought you really depicted that well. You really kind of got a sense of, from reading your book, as to how these places have been passed by. And you did a very good job of describing sort of the resiliency of the people who still live there, and how important baseball was to them. One thing which I also, and I've also been down in the Appalachian League as well after it had gone college. And one thing you, at the very end of your book, I think it was almost in your summary at the end, you talked about how even with baseball, it was still different in these communities because minor league baseball has a different experience, and it gains a different sort of connection with people than the summer college stuff. And I found that to be the case when I was in both these areas. That there was something about, particularly in a lot of these communities where, high school graduations, dropouts and stuff were very high, to have kids who are also not, D1 college athletes who were playing with a hope of making it into the major leagues. And it just seemed like the fans in the stands identified with those more so than they do with the college kids. So, but I just really thought that that you really hit the story on the head, and I'm completely with you on all the MLB stuff. But people, along those lines, and I apologize for the long observation. Is just I think it was just last week or the beginning of this week there was an article in it was either the Athlete or in Atlantic Magazine talking about how comparing MLB to the European soccer leagues, and how MLB talks about it's the great free enterprise, but it turns out that MLB is closer to a European socialist country than the soccer leagues are in Europe. So I just applaud you on a book well written.
Thank you. And you touched on like one or two things that I think are worth highlighting that I hadn't mentioned earlier, but I think it is important to acknowledge, and I do this in the book, that the quality of the baseball is not the same, with these collegiate leagues. I mean, maybe the Cape League, in the New England, you're probably familiar with that. I mean, that one is truly pretty elite, and you are going to see a lot of future major leaguers there. But for the most part, these other leagues that we're talking about, the collegiate ones, it's not that caliber. It's in the case of this league I write about. I'd say mid-tier Division I to Division III. I think I saw maybe 3 home runs over the course of the summer that cleared the fence. Each team might have maybe one guy that would throw in the 90s, maybe 2, but generally in the 80s. So, I mean, there's no doubt disputing the fact that there was a degradation in the level of the talent that you're going to see. And, related to that also, is the fact that there was sort of a magic to the connection that these communities had with a major league parent that was lost, when you severed that connection. And, in the case of Pulaski, Virginia, that I wrote about in the Harper's article, I mean, that was something that was just really, really amazing, that you would see players in Yankee pinstripes in this tiny little town in rural Western Virginia. And the people in that community knew that a few of them would one day be, playing in the house that Ruth built. And it made their community, give them like a sense of pride that there was this connection that you're not going to feel, with a bunch of college kids. And I don't mean to demean that, because I think, like I write about in the book, there's something, at least, the ballpark as a place to come together is still there. They're certainly better off, with these teams than without them. But the process of contraction did get rid of something that was special and that can't really be completely replaced. So I think that's important to acknowledge. The analogy, and I hesitate to use this when I'm in Batavia, because I don't want to, again, look like I'm demeaning the efforts of these owners that I write about, who are working their tail off to put out the best product they can. But it bothered me a little bit when Major League Baseball said, we're not getting rid of baseball in some of these towns. It's just going to be a different kind of baseball. And then they would sometimes even point to the attendance numbers and say, look, that they're just as good as they were before, if not even better. To which I would respond, well, that's, kind of like saying, we had a steakhouse, a great steakhouse in this town. We closed that up to save money, and we replaced it with a greasy burger joint. And the people in the town are still going to get burgers, so therefore they're just as well as they were with the steakhouse. Well, not really. I mean, just because they're still supporting something that they love, even in a lesser form, doesn't mean that they should have had the first thing taken away, or that they're better off without what they used to have. And so, I think both things can be true. I think it's wonderful what these entrepreneurial owners are doing to keep baseball alive, but I also think that, it would have been better to not have had these minor league teams taken away in the first place. So what? Some other questions? It looks like there's 3 other hands that are up.
Let's go to Greg Caleri. Greg, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing okay.
Go get 'em.
First of all, a couple comments. What lured me into this was the discussion of Batavia. My wife grew up in Batavia from 1950. She left there. They left in 1971. My father-in-law retired in 71, moved to Florida, but my wife spent her formative years in Batavia. And her dad was a baseball fan extraordinaire. But We had a minor league team in our neck of the woods. I live in Haverhill, Massachusetts, and Lowell, the Spinners, were lost in this contraction, but the loss wasn't quite as severe. The only thing that I would have been a little bit upset over is if the state spent a lot of money to upgrade LeLacheur Field with the hope that minor league baseball would come back. And pretty much we knew it wouldn't, because between Manchester, the Fisher Cats, Worcester, and of course the Boston Red Sox, all within 30 miles of Lowell, it probably wouldn't have been viable to try to bring an A-ball team back, to Lowell. But the other comment I had, I asked this question of the Red Sox executives, Chaim Bloom and the other fellow there, O'Halloran, who is a baseball general manager for the Red Sox. And I asked this at winter weekend. What are they going to do now with the low minors, A-ball going away? And what Mr. O'Halloran said to me was, we've got the Caribbean leagues, and that's where I think a lot of the younger talent is going to be coming from, instead of from U.S. high, kids right out of high school. That's one thing that I see this as minor league baseball contracting. Yeah, the towns are affected, but also the nature of baseball, because American and Canadian high schoolers won't get the same opportunity to get their feet wet in the pro game.
That's very true, and it actually touches on, there's something else worth mentioning, or it to that end, which is, I think what's going to happen, and a number of people said this to me, you're going to see fewer American-born black players in the major leagues, which is a problem they're already well aware of. That percent has been dropping with each passing year for decades now, to the point where I think I read, I'd have to check to make sure I get this fact right, but the percent of American-born black players in the major leagues today is as low as it's been since 3 years after Jackie Robinson. I mean, it's after it was integrated. So that's a problem again, and this gets back to sort of this major league hypocrisy, in that this is a problem they're aware of. They claim that they're addressing, but what they're doing is the complete opposite. Because what happens was, when you cut the draft from 40 rounds to 20 rounds, what kind of a player are you going to be inclined to draft? You're probably going to go with sort of the more polished product, who came up through expensive travel programs and collegiate programs, who are more often than not white. And I mean, there's obviously exceptions to this, but generally speaking, that's often how it plays out. And then the kids who were the high school kids that you're talking about, who maybe have a raw athleticism but aren't as polished, haven't had the financial wherewithal to play on these expensive travel teams since they were 7 years old. You're not going to go out on a limb and choose that guy, because he doesn't have the same track record, and it's too much of a risk. And that's the kind of person maybe you would take in the 35th round, but you're not going to take him in the 15th round. And so as a result, one of the guys I talked to said you're going to see a sport where it's going to be increasingly, Latin and, more affluent white kids from the suburbs, because of the fact that you have fewer picks, and people are going to be less inclined to take a risk on those picks. And so, we'll see if that happens, but there certainly are people out there who are predicting that is the direction that things are going to go.
Craig Garrettson, you're up. Craig, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm curious if...
Yeah, that's a good point on the comment. Sorry about the baseball scholarships. That's another reason why it I think sometimes is less diverse. But anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just curious if your wife is a Mets fan.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, I got this weird collection of teams just because I've lived kind of all over, and we didn't have it. I grew up in the D.C. area. We didn't have the Nats, and so I was kind of an Oriole fan as a kid, but then I lived in Manhattan during the late 90s and really sort of fell in love with the Bobby V teams and the first Subway Series and all that. So that's kind of how I got my baseball allegiance. She is from Pittsburgh, West Virginia, not too far from Pittsburgh, and I guess she would classify herself as a Pirate fan, but like a lot of Pirate fans, there hasn't been a lot to cheer for for a very long time. And we could go down the Pirate rabbit hole and the income disparity, or the payroll disparities, which is a related subject. Yeah, I think she actually probably would root for the Mets, probably just partly because of me and partly because of the fact that the Pirates don't give many people a lot to cheer for.
So I'm guessing you named your daughter.
No, Shay actually was not. A lot of people ask. It was a nice coincidence. I'm not going to lie, but the main reason was my mom's side of the family was O'Shea, and we just dropped because they came from Ireland, and we dropped the O and just kept Shay. But yeah, the Shea Stadium connection wasn't completely lost on me.
But my real question is, were all these minor league teams? The major leagues are acting like they were doing this out of charity. Were all these teams losing money? Is it possible to make money to have a minor league team?
Yeah, yes. It depends. Some were doing better than others. I think saving money was part of it. Again, it comes back a little bit to the short term versus the long term, I guess, way that you see things. In the short term, yes, it's indisputable that if you cut one of these teams, you have 700 or whatever less, $100,000 that you have to spend because you just don't have those players that you have to pay. However, if you step back and think, okay, well, what impact is this going to have on sort of the overall popularity of our sport in 10 years? That's a kind of a separate question that should have been asked. And I think, though, that what you're seeing is a preoccupation on, the balance sheet now and less of a concern with, how the sport's going to look in 10 or 20 years, because some of these owners probably figure I'm going to sell before then anyway. So I don't really care if the whole thing implodes once I've pocketed, like even the Pirates. The owner of the Pirates, Nuttin, I may not have the numbers exactly accurate, but let's say he bought it for, 500 million and it's now over 2 billion. So you have organizations where they basically lose for, 14 out of 18 seasons have been losing records, and most of those seasons haven't even been remotely competitive. But the team that he owns has appreciated probably close to $2 billion in those 2 decades. I don't know how many of them are thinking about what the sport's going to look like in 20 years. I think they're pretty content with the money that they're making right now.
All right, last one for tonight is Will Highland. Will, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Bruce. Thank you. And from one Will to another, I appreciate the tremendous presentation. Really drawn to it. I grew up in a small town, so just the hook of it. I'm going to be buying and reading the book.
Thank
so
you.
I'm looking forward to it. My question is, and just as a quick preface to it, I live in a community where this happened with a QM JHL hockey team. So in Lewiston, Maine, there was a team in the Canadian hockey pyramid, and it was the only one in Maine and the only international Anglo-speaking team in that league. And they folded and left in 2011 and moved to a suburb of Montreal. And there was a huge Franco-American community in this part of Maine, and they were like super upset, and the arena that was now dormant, and they scrambled to find tenants, and they've still been scrambling to find a tenant, and it's never really been the same. And because of the demographics and the regional aspects of hockey is still really popular in this part of the state. But I worry with some of these small towns, the sport of baseball and the participation among high school players will decrease if they don't have sort of a model venue to go to as a child and help spark their interest in the game. And for a lot of middle and lower class kids like myself growing up, that was minor league baseball, or that was even collegiate baseball leagues. So I guess my question is, amongst your research and time, did you ever come across stories of people who, because of the lack of a product to watch, their interest in baseball declined? Because I'm a high school coach too, and one of the things I always worry about in baseball is that eventually, you're going to start to have folded high school teams as a result of folded teams above them in the pecking order. So I guess I've just wondered if you've come across those.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that should be cause for concern. I mean, on the one hand, you could say, well, these aren't huge population centers, so 15,000 people in Batavia or whatever. So is it really the end of the world if those kids don't play baseball? But if you start, multiplying that by, all these communities everywhere, do you really want a sport where the only people playing it reside in, a handful of big cities where there's teams to go watch? Probably not. I think an even bigger issue when it comes to the future of kids playing baseball, or at least as big an issue, is this whole, and you probably see this as a high school coach, this whole idea of expensive travel leagues taking beginning to sort of creep to younger and younger ages. I'm seeing this now with my son. He plays 8U, he's 7, so he's playing coach pitch little league, and there's already team or kids defecting from the local little league to play on these super expensive travel teams. And so what that's going to start doing is hollowing out the leagues that are affordable to regular people in favor of, these sort of super leagues that are super expensive and less accessible, which again is going to, result in probably fewer, opportunities for fewer kids to play. Plus, this is something I'm thinking about even writing about in another book, because I think it deserves a lot of attention. It's really impacting, I think, childhood in a lot of ways, because there are situations now where there are high school coaches in some of these big cities who, their what's the word? That their sort of side hustle is to preside over these travel club teams, and so you have parents now who are thinking to themselves, well, if I want my kid to play on the varsity team of some really competitive prep school, and that coach is the one who also runs the travel team for the 8U, whatever league, I better get my kid, he better make the 8U travel tryout, because if he doesn't, the other kid is going to have a leg up and ultimately make the high school team, and my kid won't. So there's like this crazy, hyper competitiveness that is trickling down to younger and younger ages, making it basically less fun and less accessible, and having any number of sort of, I think, adverse consequences on the sport and its role in the lives of kids nowadays. And I see it myself. I know it's ridiculous, but then I see some of my son's friends going to these other teams, and I think to myself, oh man, are they just going to pass him up, and we're never going to catch up, so we got to do the same thing? And it's that whole fear of missing out, and it preys on the parental instinct to do what's best for your kid, and the whole thing's a huge money making operation for the people involved in it. So anyway, that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down.
Yeah, totally. I agree with you though.
Thank you.
All right, Will, tell us how to get that book, would you?
Yeah, yep. So Amazon, it's easy, or Barnes and Noble. It's at a lot of independent bookstores. I don't know if it's at all of them, but any one of those options I would encourage. And the other thing I would just ask is just, if you do read it and you like it, tell other people, because word of mouth really is tremendously effective. One of the things I'm realizing is that it's hard to get this message out, because anyone in the official baseball media doesn't want to touch anything that's critical of MLB, because they know that won't end well for them professionally, most likely. So it's kind of I just have to rely on readers to spread the word themselves. So if you can tell a few other people about it, I'm very grateful.
Great stuff. This is great stuff. All right, we're back Monday, April 14th, with our friend Dan Schlossberg, who's going to be with us discussing his book, Home Run King, The Remarkable Record of Hank Aaron. The sign-up link is located in the SABR events calendar at sabr.org/events, or in the meeting booklet distributed each Monday with the Monday message newsletter. Those in the automatic sign-up club will get their link to join the meeting Monday morning. And finally, if you're a baseball fan watching on YouTube and you like what you see, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our weekly uploads. And if you are not yet a member, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community. Offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom, SABR boasts more than 35 different research communities, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world. For more information, go to SABR.org today. Will Bardenwerper, you are fantastic. Thank you very much for doing this. I appreciate you.
Thank you, guys. Those are great questions and great comments, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
We appreciate you coming out tonight, and we're going to get everybody out of here. We'll see everybody Monday night. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.